Thank you, Chad, and thank you, Ambassador Chinoy, for giving me the opportunity. Thanks me not to squeezing me into the session because of other. I think I made a big mistake. I think I should have spoken before Dr. Sami Al-Faraji, because he was speaking from the heart. There is no way I'm going to come anywhere near what you have done. The other problem is the panel yesterday was unbelievably set as standards, the very first panel, and I think one can only hope that, we can try to do some justice to being in the same conference. And the multi-layer conflicts, I'm going to talk very telegraphically the big picture and largely only the political part of the conflict, because economy is not my field of interest. Even my own personal finances, I make a mess out of it. I always have a deficit on a monthly basis. If you look at it, there are three types of players. Some of the civil societies, the state actors, and the non-state players. In some of the cases, it is backed by the state. If you look at them, you will have conflicts at three broad levels: the internal, the interstate, and the regional. And if you look at the internal conflicts, which is the theme of the conference today, the Arab Spring is a rather disappointing one. The kind of hopes and aspirations people had just 10 years ago did not materialize, at least in the Gulf part of the problem. The reforms were extremely small, and the transformation which everyone was hoping did not happen. The monarchies seemed to survive the situation with very little political compromise or concessions. Both the Arab and the non-Arab states in the region have managed to maintain the status quo. Both the protesters and the observers have underestimated the resilience of the regime. At the end of the day, they survived without much of a problem. But there are some still good news. The protests did not disappear. You will find in Iran and Iraq, civil society is still active. Their agenda is economic. They want greater accountability. And in some cases, they even want the state to reprioritize their interests. Domestic rather than foreign policy agenda or spending. The most visible thing we will see is in Yemen, which will come in a minute. And in Yemen, we are back to the pre-unification era, and the state has been divided, and we are all familiar with the prolonged nature of the civil war there. And it has become a playground for the external players. So this is the internal problems that we face in terms of conflicts. In the external, the interstate conflicts, the last war we saw was the US invasion of Iraq, and after that fortunately, there is no interstate conflict in the military sense of the word. But the tension have increased in the last 10 years. If you look at Bahrain, the Saudi Arabia support is critical, both political and economic, is critical for the survival of Al Khalifa regime as of now. And the Shias look to Iran for the support. So therefore, once again, the external players seem to take a different side on the divide in the country. In the Iraq, the situation is much more simpler. The political, economic, military, and ideological support of Iran is key in the Iraqi context. The Yemen, as we discussed, the military involvement of Saudi Arabia and Emirates has complicated the problem, and the Iranians are fighting or directly or indirectly using Houthis as a proxy. So therefore you have enormous civil war in that country. But what we did not anticipate 10 years ago was there would be a crisis within the GCC. If you look at it, ever since the GCC was formed, there were differences. Some countries are afraid that they don't want to be dominated by Saudi Arabia. They were not very active players. Countries like Oman was trying to follow within the limits an independent policy. But the differences are always there. They somehow managed to overcome them. It never reached the boiling point. But what seemed to have bothered was the differences got personalized and became an individual clash of identities and ideologies. With the result, we have got into the Qatari situation, and you can no longer talk about a regional bloc. If you remember, just few years ago, people are talking about monetary union, visa-free travel, and even some sort of a security arrangement for the GCC countries, either GCC themselves or GCC with the help of others. Today, it looks like a distant dream. And people are talking about political isolation, economic boycott, travel restrictions, and even social boycott. And even they are even contemplating a physical isolation of Qatar. You know, until recently, you had all these things only in the context of Israel. You never imagine one Arab neighbor will do all these things against another Arab member of the same group. But somehow, Qatar has managed to survive. Better utilization of the resources, friendly countries from Turkey and Iran, and probably the unplanned nature of the entire enterprise. And the leaders who took the initiative were both either ineffective or did not visualize Qatar's ability to survive. You know, we all make mistakes, but the rulers think they are infallible. And the Qataris or the GCC are no exception to that. And for them, saving the face is more important than accepting a mistake and fixing the problem. And if you look at it, some of the countries still want to resolve the crisis. They simply don't know how to get out of this mess they created themselves. And I think this is where the interstate related conflicts stand up. The third one is much larger one, the regional one. This is not something very popular in India. Let me still put my neck and say it. When people talked about Shia Crescent, it was dismissed as a Western conspiracy. The sectarianism was seen as a bogeyman of the West to pursue its policy. But if you look at the Middle East today, you have a pattern. Whether you like it or not, whether you support or not, that's a different story. If you look at it, Iran has emerged as the most dominant player in the entire Persian Gulf. I'm one of the very few persons in India who use the word Persian Gulf. For all the others, it's simply a Gulf. You may be actually confused, it could be Gulf of Mexico. So for me, if you can have a water body called Arabian Sea, you can also call another water body as the Persian Gulf, which is, by the way, is also UN terminology. But if that is the case, the question is, you have it directly or indirectly, Iran is having an influence in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Yemen, and to some extent a section of Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. Influence is not a crime. Every country wants to have an influence beyond its territorial limits, which is a legitimate exercise. The problem is you have a physical, directly or indirectly, a presence beyond your borders. That is how you use the word hegemony. Iranian interest, legitimate. The question is Iranian hegemony and influence. This is what it was. And in the last 10 years, either directly or indirectly, or because of the American omissions and commissions, the Iranian influence has increased today than it was in 2010. That's whether you like it or not. And if you ask an Iranian objective today, it's very simple. Removal of the American presence in the Persian Gulf. And look at the rhetorics after the killing of Qasem Soleimani. Both the public and the leadership were very eager and almost a virtual wall-to-wall coalition to say there will have to be an Iranian response. Fortunately, things went wrong. All it took was, nobody ever thought a shooting down of a civilian aircraft will actually remove all the Iranian options. When the Soleimani's funeral was taking place, we were sitting in IDSA looking at what are the possible things which can go wrong. Iran can respond against the US, in the United States, in the region, against the American friends, either directly or proxy-wise. All options we were discussing. We never visualized an Iranian action of shooting down a civilian aircraft will completely put Iran on the back foot. And I'm very positive that if that aircraft was not shot down, today we'd be seeing the entirely different Middle East. I think that is the kind of situation it is there. And people often refer about inclusivity. Absolutely. There is no doubt about you need to have everything inclusive. But there is one big difference. If you look at the Indian stories, a lion wants peace, a goat also wants a peace. For a goat, peace would mean, leave me alone, I want to be alive. For a lion, goat in my stomach. So the definition of peace always differs depending upon the context. So what we see in the Iranian context is none of the Arab countries, individually or collectively, are capable of coming and standing up to Iran. In a real sense of the word, the power asymmetry is very real. And therefore, the Arab countries do not have the capacity to negotiate with Iran. And therefore, they always look to some external support. And for the same reason, Iran doesn't want any external support to any of the Arab countries. Why don't we talk to each other? And therefore, for Iran, it is talking from a position of strength. And therefore, it doesn't want any external power to be present in the Persian Gulf or beyond. By the way, the Iranian opposition to external presence in the Persian Gulf also applies to India. It is not that only they are against only the American presence, they also don't want India to be present in the Gulf if you come to be in the aid of any of the Arab countries. I think that is where we need to look at it. So when we say the inclusive dialogue or approach to the region, we need to recognize the power asymmetry between Iran and its Arab neighbors. But in spite of all of them, there are some silver lining. Things are not actually bad in the last 10 years. You will see Iraq is slowly getting into a better position than it was 10 years ago. And then now the civil society is talking more about social and economic agenda. They're no longer talking about sectarian agendas of the past. Monarchies have survived, contrary to all the expectations or hopes people had. You can see incremental changes in some of the countries. Only a couple of months ago, you find a woman being appointed as a finance minister in Kuwait. And you will find changes happening in Saudi Arabia. The transition in Kuwait was relatively smooth. And for the first time, you will have a minority had a head of a state in Iraq since 1992. The tradition has continued. You'll never find any other country where a minority population, Lebanon is an exception. As you said in India, this is the general rule, Kerala is an exception. When you say in the Middle East, this is the general rule, Lebanon is an exception. But otherwise you will find a minority population, a minority being head of the state in thing. And the last one on this thing is, you can see a perceptible decline in the American influence in the Gulf, which would actually, you may say it's a bad news, but it is extremely good news for India. So when you want to play a role, we need to look at things are loaded against you. You have to start your journey by yourself, not on piggybacking on the US. But then, what are the flip side of it? Just only three. The women empowerment has not happened, in spite of all the expectations we're talking about. If you look at except the Emirates, but if you look at other countries, the women empowerment is not there. The cabinet in Iran and Saudi Arabia do not have a single woman as ministers. And if you look at the Iranian context, all these senior positions of the institutions do not have women as a right president, supreme leader, you can name them. The process of democratization has been extremely slow. So it was very gingerly happening here and there, but the anticipation of the Arab Spring that there would be a transformation simply did not happen in the Persian Gulf. The final one, which probably all of us will have to look at, is that you do not see any moderation in the Iranian position in the last 10 years. Whether you support the Iranian position or not, that's a different story. But the question is, when you are outside the Persian Gulf, you simply cannot ignore Iran is seen as an intimidating threat to the neighbors. And you will find the Iranian, whether the official position or the track to dialogue, you do not find much of a difference in what the Iranians are saying. So there is no way you can actually say what you can actually anticipate. Is there any way? If you look at all the track to, whether it is Oslo to any of the agreement, you need to distance yourself. This is the official position, this is the private position, probably that is what you need to work on any compromises. But from what I knew from outside is, there is not much of a difference in the official Iranian position and the private Iranian position when it comes to track to. I think that is what's going to be a challenge, and probably if you are going to meet another 5-10 years ago in the same room, we may be probably talking other issues might be resolved, but when it comes to Iran, you are still going to think about, unless there is a fundamental change, we are going to have a same set of problem in the years to come. Thank you very much.